Hello everybody. Today we have got a pre-modern video. It's actually not very often that I have been doing these, but I definitely should pay more attention to this format, because if you look back at the channel page you will see that it says 93, 94 and pre-modern, and I simply don't find myself playing pre-modern as often as I would like to. But I'm really nostalgic for this format as well, because, well, I started playing paper Magic in 2000, so these cards are definitely very nostalgic for me. I probably have more rights for nostalgia for this format than 93, 94, to be honest with you. But nevertheless, without any further ado, here is the deck that I played. I played it more than a year ago, actually, with my friend Matt, and I will post a video of us doing that. It was a really interesting series of games where we pre-made some Brawl decks, essentially a 60 card plus one commander deck, and there it is. There isn't much else to say about this format, and I didn't really follow the proper pre-modern rules, because for these three colors I had this one, but I will tell you about this deck in the next video. So today we have got a proper mono blue deck with Arcanis the Omnipotent, and he makes a great commander in my opinion, because the ability is really strong. It can also protect itself, well, provided that you have a ton of mana, so you can even use it as soon as you cast him. And it's just Ancestral Recall every turn for you, which is amazing. It's even better than Ancestral Recall, because Ancestral Recall, of course, is a card itself, and you only get a card advantage of +2, but as soon as you tap him, you just get +3 cards. This is really powerful. So Arcanis the Omnipotent, I was able to cast him several times, and as soon as you get him out, of course, you get some tremendous advantage. And I just want to say that I'm not really a commander player, so the power level, even in the pre-modern commander, is not very well known to me. I'm just talking about my personal experience. So I played this deck a couple of times, really, but I did enjoy it. I really think that I should play commander more often, be it 60 card or 100 card. In pre-modern, there's definitely quite a lot of good stuff you can do. So here is the Arcanis himself. If we talk about the other creatures, we don't really have a lot of them, but they have got some nice utilities or just evasion, right? So this is the bubble, as we used to call it. So the airship, 3/1 flying, may block only creatures with flying, but it's not for flying, it's for attacking. I love the idea of these airships, of these zeppelins and so on, and it's just a beautiful thing. And as you know, this is a technical reprint of a card I don't have there, but this is a Cloud Spirit from Stronghold, if I'm not mistaken, so it's an identical card, as you know. But here in the Mercadian Masks, we do have this Rishadan theme. Next, we've got the Sorcerer that doesn't need any introduction. It's a beautiful foil. This is one of the reasons why I like to play pre-modern, because I do have some nice foils there. So, of course, he's a pinger. Paired with some other pingers, he will do some nice damage. And Phantom Warrior, so this card is really not very special. It's 2/2 unblockable for 3 mana. Not a really good deal, but not too bad either. But what's the most interesting thing for me personally is that this is probably the only card that I have left from the very first product that I bought. So it was almost 23 years ago that I bought this starter of the 6th edition for 2 players, and it was an amazing moment for me. So this is when they started selling Magic products. I mean, maybe it had been 1 year, but this is when I actually managed to get enough money, and actually when I was old enough, to travel on my own and go to these clubs, as we call them, those LGS types of places. And you know, I still have this very card. I definitely remember that I didn't trade it, I didn't throw it away, didn't get lost anywhere. And of course, in this product, you had 2 decks of 40 cards in all 5 colors. But this is really the only card, the origin of which I can trace. And look, it is a white bordered card. And I had just penny sleeves. I didn't have those fancy, you know, Came Sea Dragon Shield Ultra Pro even kind of stuff. And I did play this card quite a lot, but look at the condition. I mean, yes, it's not perfect, but it could have been worse. And at first we just played without any kind of protectors at all, without any sleeves, and I don't know. It's a really, really pleasant thing for me to see, because it's definitely the card that I had from back in the day. Next, speaking of creatures, I've got this very weird card. It is a dwarf. Legally, it is a dwarf now. And this Rebecca is just 0/1 for 4 mana, but it can deal 2 damage to a creature or player, and then it doesn't untap. So technically, it can be more interesting than, for example, the Sorcerer, who pings only for 1, because you can take out some bigger creatures, and it can serve as a nice finisher. So quite interesting. This guy is again the prodigal sorcerer, as you understand. Exactly the same thing. Looks like this merfolk should be flying, but it isn't. A really weird thing. However, speaking of flying things, we've got this card that I absolutely adore. I probably prefer this art to the 7th edition one, which is also quite funny. But this brilliant bird just damages your opponent every turn, well, provided that, of course, it is not blocked, and you draw a card. So it's really nice. You know, the cards that you see here are, of course, partially part of this very important archetype of Drogo that we had in 2000, with all of this alternative cost, counter spells, which were very important, and which I also did use here. So it's a really, really you know, nostalgic deck for me, reminiscent of some of the stuff I used to play against, because I didn't really have this deck back in the day. So the fairies here, well, it's again a pinger, as you can see. So together with the other pingers, they were able to do some serious damage. Air Elemental, again from the 6th edition, and 4/4 flying. However, to be honest with you, about this particular card, I'm not entirely sure that it did come from this you know, pack, this very pack, as this warrior did, because I did sell some of these cards, I did trade some of these cards, so not entirely sure that this one also comes from there, but well, I did have it there, I believe. Yes. Okay. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Morphling. So Morphling, of course, is a real Superman. It's a really versatile card. Can do so many things. Can be untapped. Can gain flying. Can get virtually, you know, 5/1 or 1/5 based on what you want to do with it. And it's still a good card. Still a good card by modern standards, I believe. And quite an interesting one. So, of course, it acts as a finisher if you want to. It acts as many things. And, well, speaking of finishers, this is the biggest guy that we've got here. So, power and toughness equal to the number of instants in all graveyards. Again, including your opponent's graveyard, of course. So, 8 mana is, of course, nothing to sneeze at. But remember, this is Commander. Even though it's a 60-card Commander, it's a little bit faster, probably. But yeah, we do have a lot of instants. I didn't remember how big he was when I cast him, but it definitely was worth the mana cost, so to say. Next, so talking about mana cost, by the way, let's look at the basic lands. So there are a ton of basic lands, of course, as you can see. And, you know, I talked about this in my other videos that I really like to have a lot of mana nowadays. Sometimes I must sacrifice this slot, maybe taking out a card that could be fun to play, but you know, it is what it is. I really don't want to get mana screwed, so getting mana flooded, especially in some cards like in some decks like this, it's very important to have enough mana. So miscalculation, a card that I remember, I bought this Tombstone pre-constructed deck. So do you remember these pre-constructed decks that we had back in the day? I think they started maybe in 1997 or maybe even earlier, I'm not sure. I definitely know they were around in the Stronghold era, in the Tempest block, but not sure that they were around earlier. So basically there you got this pre-constructed deck, and it had one theme, it had one idea. Sometimes they were monocolored. Like the first deck that I ever got was my Mercadian Masks Rebels deck, so actually it was quite a lucky thing, because this deck was able to beat some of the local semi-competitive decks, I would say. They were not necessarily the top decks, but they were quite good. And this is one of the things that didn't turn me away from Magic, because then as soon as I got some other pre-constructed decks, and you know, I didn't buy many singles, you know, I just got what I could, because I really didn't have enough money for that. And you know, after that I started losing in a terrible way, so probably getting that Rebels deck was a good thing. Nevertheless, the Tombstone deck had this following idea: you could cycle cards, and some of these cycling cards were creatures, like this Drake, I believe, which was 2/4, and it was really nothing really important, I would say. It was nothing impressive, to be honest with you. There weren't even many big creatures, but nevertheless you had some reanimation spells. So the idea was to cycle and reanimate, and needless to say it worked in a terrible way. Of course, technically the cycling mechanic was great, and we even know of some fluctuator decks, but definitely you didn't get those cards in that pre-constructed deck, and the overall thing was absolutely terrible. So this is where I remember miscalculation from, but now I see that it is a card that gives you options, and it definitely can serve its purpose. I did play it here and I was not disappointed. So misdirection, a very important card. So of course it is a pitch card, it's alternative cost, and being able to redirect a spell gives you so much it gives you just so many opportunities, you know. It gives you so much freedom to maybe kill your opponent if they're trying to fireball you. This is the first thing that comes to your mind. But then of course you also think about redirecting a spell to your opponent's creature, and for example a kill spell, and sometimes there are so many interesting things. You can redirect a beneficial spell to yourself or your own creatures, and of course it comes when your opponent doesn't expect it, because you're tapped out. Sometimes it can even prevent a counter spell, so you just cast misdirection, and you make it target somebody else. You make your opponent's spell target somebody else on the stack. So there are really a lot of things you can do with it. Of course, I was not disappointed with it. Fact or Fiction is a really polarizing card, because a lot of people seem to hate it, because there's so many choices, and you don't really know what's in your opponent's hand, and a lot of things can go wrong. So I definitely understand it, why many people are not really fond of this card. And I remember when it came out, people were playing it like crazy, so blue was still very popular, and I don't know, I really got to experience the joy of playing it now, and I see it is a very good card, of course. Then Opportunity. So speaking of card draw, so 6 mana, you know, for drawing 4 cards. Yeah, it is a bit too expensive, but let's remember that we're trying to play this counter strategy, and yeah, sometimes we do have enough mana for that. Deflection, of course, is pretty much the same thing as misdirection. Misdirection is probably better because alternative cost can be used quite often. This one is 4 mana, and from some players who used to play it back in the day and were also excited about it, I heard that it was very disappointing often for 4 mana. I don't know, I don't think I played it too much, but here it is. Standstill. So Standstill is a great card, of course. It is one of these pre-modern stars nowadays. This card didn't get so much exposure when it was released. I mean, people did notice it, but the craziest things with Standstill started to follow much later, to be honest. So when a player plays a spell, you sacrifice it, and basically you get an ancestral recall, right? And it really makes for some very interesting mind games. You know, who is going to do it first? Of course, usually it's going to be your opponent, because you're normally supposed to cast it when you get some advantage, even some virtual advantage, maybe when you prevent your opponent's aggro deck from developing in some way. So really a great thing. You know, with blue it's very often about card advantage. I mean, it is about card advantage with pretty much any color, but blue is so good at it, and you must make sure that you have enough answers for, and different answers for your opponent's threat, because there's usually no such thing as a bad threat, but bad answers, they definitely exist. So anyway, Compulsion, yes, it's one of my pet cards. Torment is a really, really important set for me. So Torment and Odyssey, I know a lot of people are not nostalgic for those days, but for me it was such a nice thing. I had a ton of time to spend, and basically I had school only twice a week, and it was my last year before graduating from school, and it was a really special circumstance. So sometimes I would just go to this LGS and hang out with people, and I started finally to get a tiny bit of money, and I bought some singles. I played, of course, this infamous Blue-Green Madness deck. So this was my very first competitive deck, if we could say so, even though I didn't do really well. And it was in 2002, so late 2002 actually. Onslaught had already been released, but I did play with this card, even though it normally shouldn't be played in this the Green Madness deck, but I still liked it. So foil, there are countless jokes about foil, and just check how much a foil card costs, especially the original one from Prophecy. So it is a crazy thing, because of course Wizards call them premium cards, and you know, I remember seeing an ad, so you know, going on this so to say memory lane trip. I remember that I saw an ad in a magazine, so it was a PC games magazine, and they even had those cutout magic cards, you know, a couple of pages, and they printed those portal cards, and you could cut them out and play with the guy. So, you know, anything they could do to get people into the game. And it did work, you know. I had already been sold on this game for many years before they started selling it. I just had to, you know, preach it to other people, and you know, a lot of people, a lot of my friends, they started playing Magic because I asked them to do so, and then they kind of lost interest in it. Most people, I would say, but nevertheless. So yeah, what I was talking about is that they had this ad for the premium cards, and that the translation was something like not really a premium card, because they probably didn't understand what they were talking about. So it was something like a bonus card, right? So they said that you can find a bonus card in each pack now. And remember, it was just Mercadian Masks, right? So Mercadian Masks, this is, it all makes sense, right? Mercadian Masks, Nemesis. So they were trying to advertise this foil stuff, right? And even though, of course, they had released it earlier, right? It was with Urza's Legacy that we got the first foils, right? But nevertheless, what I'm trying to say is that we didn't even have an idea of these premium or bonus cards, as they called them, and later we started calling them foils. They were so scarce, and only later did I actually see what they meant. So, nevertheless, yes, foil. Is it a good card? It is a worse force of will, of course. Yes, you don't lose one life, but, 3 for 1, it's insane. But still, sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it really is worth it. And, of course, it combos very well with Thwart. So returning 3 islands, sometimes you just have too many lands anyway, and there is these amazing card trade routes. It can also work with compulsion. Sometimes, you can't really have too much mana, but sometimes an extra card or just cycling through a deck is more beneficial than having extra mana. So anyway, Thwart, yeah, it's still a good card. Still a good card. So in combination, they work in an amazing way. Exclude, it is a cantrip. It is the same thing as dismiss, but it is limited to creatures. So basically, it's the ugly son of dismiss and remove soul, if you see what I mean. But I don't know. It was a popular card. Now I feel a little bit worse about it. Draw a card. Is it worth 1 mana? Yes, but on the other hand, would I play a remove soul? Probably not. Still, probably it is worth it in this sub format. So now the card that I really relied on quite a lot, Vortex. So as you see, what it does is that it says X and blue mana creatures can take this turn unless their controller pays X for each attacking creature. So what's the idea here? The idea, of course, is that we're going to have more mana than our opponent, and with this mana, we will usually just activate Vortex and make maybe only 1 or 2 of our opponent's creatures available for attack, and for them we will have some big enough blocker, and it's usually working quite well. So this card very often served me to stall my opponent, especially coupled with Mishra's Helix, which we do have over here, right? What a surprise. They're side by side, because I did use them in one game state, I think, and I didn't shuffle the deck after that. So, of course, Mishra's Helix is an amazing card for X tap, X lands. Essentially, you get enough lands, and you manage to deprive your opponent of a certain color, and after that it's just going to rely on them finding this disenchant or some kind of artifact removal. Capsize is another crippling card in many ways, because it's 6 mana with buyback, but again, in this format we very often would have this kind of mana, and basically you make your opponent cast creature, for example, every turn, and it's so terrible because they cast it every turn, they are not able to attack with it, you always bounce it, and it just leads them to stalling while you are developing. Very often you will have more resources than your opponent will. This is of course in a perfect world, but still. So this it's really, really fragile card. So not only is it a creature, but it's also 1/1, so incredibly easy to kill. And the ability is of course very powerful, but don't think I really used him a lot. Probably this is the case where I would prefer the 7th edition art here, but yeah. Anyway, so Trade Route, it's a card that I love so much. I remember making a deck back when I played, something other than those historic formats such as Premodern and 93-94, and I remember making a green and a blue deck, like Turbo Lands with this one, and it was amazing. So anyway, here you can just return a land you control to its owner's hand, discard and draw a card. So essentially it gives you so many options. Sometimes you have just extra mana, maybe no lands at all, then you will bounce them, you will discard some cards looking for this counter spell that you really need or something else, and it's an amazing card. Any card that turns some of the things that you have into some other resources, such as a land in your hand, or maybe even a land on the battlefield, as we say nowadays, into potentially different card is amazing, right? And sometimes when you have too many lands, you can just cycle through them, and very often it is the case. So you discard a card, you draw a card at the end of your turn, then you see it's a land again, discard and draw a land again, and sometimes can save you many turns. So it's a virtual time walk in many ways. It's an amazing card, really. Then we've got Meditate. So it's really complex card. So skip your next turn, draw 4 cards. Yes, it is amazing to draw 4 cards for 3 mana, but at what cost? And sometimes skipping a turn can be worth it. I do understand that this card is popular for a slightly different reason. It is popular for the reason of comboing in some way, so there are some combos with it. So playing it as it is, it doesn't really look, of course, broken. It's maybe it's still not a good idea. I did play it, but I cannot say that I liked it. It's not that I immediately lost after playing it, but just didn't give me this nice advantage. So this Fairy Conclave is, of course, a beautiful foil. Probably the most expensive of these lands, right? We also have got the green one, the Treetop Village, which also got popular, but here it's a 2/1 blue flyer for only 2 mana, so it's a really nice thing, right? Of course, it is used in some decks such as Landstill nowadays, those living lands. Impulse, so the story of Impulse. It's a really funny one, and there was a reprint of this. But in the original one, they said, look at top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library. Shuffle your library afterwards. So do you see a problem with it, in case you don't know about the story? This is one of those cards. I remember one player told me that shouldn't be played as it is written, and I was really surprised. I asked him, so what's the story here? Because I of course knew about some other wordings that we had, such as mana source being introduced, berry, and those things, some keywords sometimes got replaced and so on. Sometimes maybe they weren't really replaced, but got just phased out of the game. But anyway, here he said, so it's a good example of a card that was errated, and back then it was not reprinted, right? So there were no reprints of this card until much later. But this card couldn't be played as it is written, because it doesn't make any sense. Why would you arrange the cards in some way and then shuffle your library, right? So you don't shuffle your library, of course. And here we have got Merchant Scroll, a card where you actually do shuffle your library, and it does make sense here. So it's a tutor. Very often you would tutor for some kind of a card drawing mechanism or a counter spell. Of course, your opponent sees it, which is an extra cost here, which is especially important for blue, but it still is a great card. And next we have got the proper counter spell. The 7th edition art I like here quite a lot. And I do remember how the 7th edition came out, and a lot of people were crazy. They said, oh, it's ugly, it's not magic, it's something else, I do understand that Wizards try to appeal to the wider market, probably make the art more comic book style, and at the same time, there are quite a lot of interesting pieces of art, and I think it was one of the most massive art rehauls, meaning that it was the first time that Wizards redone so many cards, right? They decided to redo the art of so many different cards. It was really unprecedented back in the day. And here we have got Deep Analysis, another card from Blue Green Madness. So here I don't really have any resources to use it as a discarded card. Of course, we can use this compulsion, but probably not the case. It's just drawing 2 cards for 4, and then 2 more, and 3 life, drawing 4 cards. Not really special, but it's an okay card still. Abduction I like a lot. Essentially it's your control magic, but with a kind of a drawback. but also a bonus. So you don't tap the creature, okay, so it's a tiny bit better than control magic in this way. So maybe you can steal your opponent's creature and you can immediately block with it, or maybe if it already has haste, right, you untap it and attack with it immediately if it was tapped. But nevertheless, here, if it is killed, then it is returning back to your opponent. Of course, there is this amazing combo with Iridescent Drake, if I'm not mistaken, and I do have it, probably should explore it, right? Then we've got Mana Leak. It's pretty much staple. You know, when they reprinted it in the 8th edition, people said, yes, Counterspell is too powerful, Counterspell for 2 blue. No, we're not going to have any of that anymore, because blue is bad for the game. You know, we can't have blue that is too powerful. It's not beginner friendly. So that's why your staple was cancelled, but the problem is that people didn't really play it that much anyway. But here it is. So Mana Leak here, not really happy with it, but did play it. And this is Dismiss that I mentioned, and I always like casting this card. So there it is, there it is. This is the, once again, Arcanis the Omnipotent deck. This video was really too long, so thank you for watching in case you have done that. And I just want to say that, yes, it is a pleasure to play this format, especially if you have got some more or less a friendly environment, you know, because if I go with this deck to this typical EDH meeting, then probably, of course, people wouldn't kill me at first because they would think that my deck is absolute trash. I mean, if I expanded to 100 cards, but still, I don't know. It's probably better to keep such things to such sub-formats as Premodern Brawl. But nevertheless, I will post the video one day, I hope, because I have such a huge backlog of the videos that I need to comment on. But now you will definitely have the weekly videos, and I hope to add to those deck techs and just card discussions, those weekly gameplay videos. It's definitely manageable, you know. No matter how busy you are, you always have this, you know, maybe extra hour per week to do that, to make videos and do some of the pleasant stuff like that. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.